Hello, welcome back. I'm Abhishek De Silva, an undergraduate of the JAM Institute for Advanced Technology. Welcome back with the project named eShop, and today I'm going to discuss about the program of this product selling history page, including the product searching, viewing pending delivery products, and daily selling product process. And here we are able to search the invoices by the invoices ID. Here we can see we can find the relevant invoice by the invoice ID, and also we are able to find the invoices from choosing a date. Here I have obtained a duration of a month, and when I click on find, we can see that the invoices that are belong to this month or the duration is viewed here. And also here we are able to change the status of the relevant order, as this we can see that this order has delivered and this order is in the packing stage, and these orders are still in the confirmed state. So if we click on this confirm order, we can see that now it's in the packing state, and then if the packing stage is fulfilled or succeed, and then we can click again on this and the relevant product is dispatched to the relevant customer. And then if the relevant product has shipped, we can click again on the dispatch, and we can see that a new button called shipping is displayed. And then when we click again on this shipping, we can see that the button is changed to delivered. So then today we're going to discuss about the invoice searching process, and also searching the invoices from the duration, and also this state changing of the relevant product. So then let's move to Visual Studio Code. Here at first I have included the connection.php file, and also for the input tag relevant to the search by invoice ID label, I have called a function on the key up of that by the name search invoice. And if I move to JavaScript file to discuss about this search invoice function, here's the relevant function, and we have obtained the element with the ID search text, and we have obtained the relevant value of that. And then we have stored that in a variable called text. If I show do the element with the ID called search text, here is the relevant ID. It belongs to the input tag relevant to this search by invoice ID. So then after that I have created a new XML HTTP request and stored that in a variable called request here. And after that I have called an anonymous function on each change in state of this request, and I have check through an if condition whether the status is equal to 100 and also the ready state is equal to 4. And if so, we have obtained the response text of this request and stored the in a variable called response. And after that we have obtained the element with the ID view area, and we have in HTML the response that we have obtained. If I showed you the element with the ID view area, here's a div with the ID view area which is relevant to this section. So then through the open function I have mentioned that I'm using the get method here, and also I'm sending information to the search invoice process.php file, and I have binded the text that we have obtained by the name ID, and then we have mentioned true here to mention that I'm using the Ajax method. And then we have sent the request to the server side. So then let's move to search invoice process.php file. In the search invoice process.php file I have included the connection.php file at the very beginning, and then I have checked whether an ID or the element by the name ID that comes to the get method is set. If so, we have obtained the relevant value and stored in a variable called invoice ID here. And then I have called a search function with the query select all from the invoice table, where invoice ID equals to the invoice ID that we have obtained, and then I have stored the relevant results we get back from the database in a variable called invoice result set. And then I have obtained the number of rows in it and stored in a variable called invoice num. Through an if condition I have checked whether the invoice num is equal to 1. If so, I have obtained the result that stored in this invoice result through the fetch as okay, and stored in a variable called invoice data. And I have echoed the design that we use to display the details of the relevant product here. And then if it comes to the else of that if condition, we have displayed the message as invalid invoice ID. And in this design we have echoed the invoice ID that's stored in this invoice data as the invoice ID, and then I have used the PHP script here, and I have called a search function with the query as select all from the product table where ID equals to the invoice or the product ID that's stored in this invoice data, and then we have stored the relevant details we get back from the database in the variable called product results set, and I have obtained the relevant results in that variable and stored that in a variable called product data. And then I have displayed the title that's stored in this product data array and as the name of the relevant product, and then I have again called a search function with the query as select all from the user table where email equals to the user email stored in this invoice data, and I have stored the relevant information we get back from the database in a variable called user results set, and after that through the vector circle I have obtained the relevant information stored in this user results set variable and store that in a variable called user data. And then I have echoed the first name and the last name that's stored in this user data variable as the name of the customer, and then I have echoed the total that's stored in this invoice data as the total amount, and also I have echoed the quantity that's stored in this invoice data, and also here through an if condition I have checked whether the status that is stored in this invoice data is equal to 0. If so, we have displayed the text of this button as confirm order, and if it comes to the else of the if condition where it checks whether the status that's stored in this invoice data is equal to 1. If so, we have changed the text as packing, and if it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the status of the invoice data is equal to 2, there we have changed the text of this button as dispatch. And if it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the status that's stored in this invoice data is equal to 3, if so, we have changed the text of this button to shipping. And also if it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the status that's stored in this invoice data is equal to 4, and if so, we have changed the text of this button as delivered. And then here again in the selling history.php file I have given an ID to this input variable relevant to the label called from date as from, and also the input field relevant to this to date label I have given an ID as to. And to the button called find or the button with the text find I have called an on-click function as find settings. So then let's move to JavaScript file to discuss about this find settings function. Here is the relevant function, and I have obtained the element with the ID from or the value. I have obtained the relevant value and stored in a variable called from here, and here too I have obtained the value of the element with the ID 2 and stored in a variable called 2. And after that I have created a new XML HTTP request and stored in a variable called request here, and I have called an anonymous function on each change in the state of this request, and I have checked whether through an if condition whether the status of this request is equal to 200 and the ready state is equal to 4, and if so, we have obtained the response text of this request and stored in a variable called response, and I have obtained the element with the ID view area, and I have in HTML the response we have obtained from the server side. And through this open function I have represent that I am using the get method, and then I have sent information to the find settings process.php file, and I have binded the from by the name f, and also I have binded the to by the name t, and I have mentioned true here to mention that I'm using the ajax method, and I have sent the request to the server side. So then let's move to find settings process.php file. Yeah, at the very beginning I have included the connection.php file, and through an if condition I have checked whether the value by the name f that comes to the get method is set, and also the value that comes by the name t that comes through the get method is set. If so, we have obtained the relevant values and stored in a variable called from and to respectively, and I have called a search function with the query as select all from the invoice table, and I have stored the relevant results we get back from the database in a variable called invoice results set, and I have obtained the number of rows in it and stored in a variable called invoice num, and I have used a for loop here with the variable as x and assigning a value as 0, and I have checked whether the value of this x is less than the invoice num, and I have used an increment here. I have obtained the information that's stored in this invoice resources through the fetchers and stored in a variable called invoice data, and also I have obtained the date that's stored in this invoice data and store in a variable called sold date, and I have used the export function, and I need to export this from my space, and I need to export the value that's stored in this sole date variable, and I have stored the relevant values we get from this export function in a variable called date here, and also I have obtained the 0th value that's stored in this date array and stored that in a variable called d here, and also I have obtained the value that's stored by the 1 here that's stored in this date array and stored that in a variable called t. And through if condition I have checked whether the from is not empty and the to is empty. If so, we have checked whether the from is less than or equal to the date that we have to know the variable that's stored in this d, and if so, we have used the design of the product display in here. Here too we have echoed the invoice id that's stored in this invoice data, and then we have called a search function with the query asset or from the product table where id equals to the product id that's stored in this invoice data. Through a fetch assoc we have obtained the relevant information stored in this product is asset and stored in variable called product data, and I have echoed the title stored in this product data, and also I have called a search function again with the query asset or from the user table where email equals to the user email that's stored in this invoice data, and I have obtained the relevant information that we get back from the database and that we stored in this user result set through the fetch assoc and stored in a variable called user data here, and I have echoed the first name and last name that's stored in this user data as the name of the relevant customer, and also I have echoed the total that's stored in this invoice data and also the quantity that's stored in this invoice data. And then I have checked whether through an if condition the status of this invoice data is equal to 0, so then we have changed the text of this button to confirm mode, and this status is equal to 1, we have changed the text to packing, and if the status is 2, we have changed the text as dispatch, and similarly when the status is equal to 3, we have changed again the text as shipping, and also if the status is equal to 4, we have changed the text as to delivered. And here if it comes to the errors of that if condition where we check whether the from is not empty and the to is empty, here we check whether the from is empty and the to is not empty. So inside this through an if condition we have again checked whether the 2 is greater than or equal to the value that's stored in this variable called d, and here is the same design that we discussed earlier. And if it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the from is not empty and also the to is not empty, if so we have checked whether through an if condition again the from is less than or equal to the value that's stored in this d, and the 2 is greater than or equal to the value that's stored in this variable called d. And here too we have displayed the same design that we discussed earlier. So now I move to the selling history.php file again, and then here's the relevant div with the id called view area which I showed you earlier, and here I have used the PHP script again, and I have created a variable as query here by storing a query as select all from the invoice table, and then I have created another variable as page number without assigning any value. Through an if condition I have checked whether the page we get from the get method is set. If so, we have assigned the relevant value by the name page to the variable called page number, and if it comes to the errors of the if condition we have assigned the value as 1 to this variable called page number. And I have called the search function again with the query or the query that's stored in this variable called query, and then I have stored the relevant information we get back from the database in a variable called invoice result set, and I have opened the number of rows in it and stored that in a variable called invoice num. And I have created a variable as results per page, and I have assigned the value as 20, and I have created a variable as number of pages, and I have called the ceil function here as I need to obtain the rounded off value of this calculation, which includes the invoice number divided by the results per page. And then here too I have created another variable as page result set, which is to a value which comes through a calculation. The calculation is we have subtracted 1 from the page number and we have multiplied the relevant value by the results per page. And then here too I have called a search function with the query as the value that's stored in this query, or the query that's stored in this variable called query, and we have concatenated the remaining part to that as limit the results we get back from the database by the results per page which means limit the results by 20 and then keep an offset of the page results. And then we have stored the relevant results we get back from the database in a variable called selected results it. And then I have done the number of rows in it and stored that in a variable called selected num. And I have used a for loop and I have created a variable called x and assigned a value as 0. And I have checked whether the value of this x is less than the selected num. If so, I have used increment here. And I have obtained the details that stored in the selected results through the fetch as well, and store the variable called selected data. And here is the design relevant to displaying the information of the relevant product. Here we have echoed the invoice ID that's stored in this selected data as the invoice ID. And then here I have called the search function with the query as all from the product table where ID equals to the product ID that's stored in the selected data. And I have stored in a variable called product results it. And then I have obtained the results stored in this product results through the fetch as well, and stored in a variable called product data. And then I have echoed the title is stored in this product data as the product name. And then I have called a search function again with the query as select all from the user table where email equals to the user email stored in this selected data. And I have stored the relevant information we get back from the database in a variable called user results it. And then I have obtained the relevant information stored in this user results it through the fetch as well, and stored in a variable called user data. And I have echoed the first name and last name that's stored in this user data as the customer. And then I have echoed the total that's stored in the selected data and also the quantity that's stored in the selected data. And then I have checked whether through an if condition the status that's stored in the selected data is equal to 0. If so, I have used the text of this button as confirm order. And in the next else if condition, I have checked whether the status of the selected data is equal to 1. If so, I have changed the text as packing. And in the next else if condition, we have checked whether the status equal to 2. If so, we have changed the text as dispatch. And we have checked whether the status equal to 3 in the next else if condition. And then we have changed the text as shipping. And in the last else if condition, we have checked whether the status of that selected data is equal to 4. If so, we have changed the text of this button as delivered. As you can see, I have called a non-click function on each of these buttons by the name change invoice status, and I have sent a parameter as invoice ID that's stored in the selected data. So then let's move to JavaScript file to discuss about this change invoice status function. Here's the change invoice status function, and I have obtained the relevant parameters sent from the selling history.php file. And then I have created a new XML HTTP request and stored in a variable called request here. And I have called an anonymous function on each change in state of this request. And through an if condition, I have checked whether the status equal to 200 and the ready state is equal to 4. If so, I have obtained the relevant response text sent by the server side and then stored in a variable called response here. And through an if condition, I have checked whether the response is equal to success. If so, I have reloaded the page, and if it comes to the errors of that if condition, we have added the relevant response we get back from the server side. And through this open function, I have mentioned that I am using the get method, and then I have send the information to the change invoice status process.php file, and I have binded the ID by the name ID here, and I have used true here to mention that I am using Ajax method. And then I have sent the information to the server side. So then let's move to change invoice status process.php file. Here too, I have included the connection.php file at the very beginning, and through an if condition, I have checked whether a value by the name ID that comes to the get method is set. If so, we have obtained the relevant value and stored in a variable called invoice ID here. And I have called the search function with the query as select all from the invoice table where invoice ID equals to the ID that we have obtained. And I have stored the relevant results we get back from the database in a variable called invoice results set, and I have obtained relevant information stored in this invoice results set through the fetch as well, and stored in a variable called invoice data. And then I have obtained the status that's stored in this invoice data and stored in a variable called status ID. And through an if condition, I have checked whether the status ID is equal to 0. If so, I have called an IOD function with the query as update the invoice table and set the status of this to 1 where the invoice ID is equal to the invoice ID that we have obtained. And if it comes to the else of that if condition where we check whether the status of this equal to 1, If so, we have called an IOD function again with the query as in update the invoice table and set the status as to where the invoice ID equals to the invoice ID that we have obtained. And if it comes to the next else if condition where we check whether the status ID is equal to 2, if so, we have called an IOD function with the query as update the invoice table and set the status to 3 where the invoice ID is equal to the invoice ID that we have obtained. And if it comes to the next else if condition where it checks whether the status ID is equal to 3, if so, we have called an IOD function here too with the query as update the invoice table and set the status to 4 where invoice ID is equal to the invoice ID that we have obtained. And then at last I have echoed a message as success, and I'm again moved to selling history.php file, and here we can see the same process that we discussed on the pagination part. I have used that here, and this is the process of the product searching and weave pending delivery products and also the daily selling weaving of this selling history page. So then let's meet you the next video, and bye for now.